Welcome back to the Unbreakable Boundaries podcast with your host, myself, Jennifer Manili. And this is going to be a really fun episode for me. I actually have my friend Katie Kocher on and her mom, Barb Kocher. Oh, look, I said that right. um, and and I'm just really excited because it's another one of those opportunities that we get to have some insights from a mother and a daughter and what some of their experiences were while you have a parent that is dealing with a child that is in active addiction, and what does that look like for them. So I'm always really excited to get to hear some of these types of stories because I think it's really important for us to start feeling not alone, to start really kind of getting some of that education going on in terms of that people, this is what people experience and this is what they go through, and I think we need to talk about it. So this is what I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with Katie. Hi, Katie.
Hi, how are you?
And I think I would love to kind of hear from each of you, like, what were some of your experiences in terms of growing up? And I know this is a big question, and we don't have like, all day to talk about it, but just kind of your experience of what it was growing up like in your household, and what were some of the things that maybe you struggled with even before some of the drugs came into the picture.
So I feel like this would be interesting for my mom to speak on, but
Oh, and she
I
will.
okay, like as a child,
Yeah. Before
I mean,
drugs came into the picture.
I
Yep.
just have memories of like very I think I have kind of limited memories, but I do remember things like hiding in the laundry basket, like waiting for somebody to come look for me and nobody ever came and looked for me. Or things like if we didn't, because there was 5 kids, right, and if we didn't go to the restaurant that I wanted to go to, then I would not speak and not order.
Right.
um
And so
and
I
so
want
just
to, when you were hiding in the laundry basket and nobody came to look for you, like, how did you perceive that in your little kid brain?
and that's the interesting part, is I don't remember going very deep with it. I just remember getting bored and leaving the laundry basket. But I do
Fair.
remember like feeling, I remember we were at the old house, so it would have been before I was 8. Like the way that the living room was sort of like adjacent to the kitchen, and I remember like laying on that couch while everyone was like in the kitchen around the table, like laughing and talking, having a good time, and I felt like really negative and like apart from yeah, just like I didn't belong, or like I was lonely, or um yeah. I
And
mean,
this
and
and this was in a house where you had four other siblings.
I think at that point there would have been
Okay.
two or three other siblings.
And obviously like your mom and your dad. So it's kind of a house full
Right.
of people, and yet you still kind of were feeling very a part of and kind of alone. Is that?
Yeah, apart from, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Barb, I'll ask the same question. Is in your perspective, what was it like at that time, like when Katie was growing up? And what was going on with you? And how did you see her?
So things were very busy, particularly at the early time that Katie addressed there. We did have the 4 kids at that particular house, and not long after the 5th one joined. My husband and I both worked full time, both in pretty demanding jobs at that time. We made such great effort, and my guidepost, however faulty at the time, was to do better than my parents did. No offense, mom and dad. But Katie has recalled, one of my wounds growing up is that I had 6 siblings, and mom and dad never attended anything that I did on my own. So we like plays or swim meets or that type of thing. So we did a lot of family time. We were having dinners together every night, to include Katie. We went on family vacations. We camped a lot back then. We made everybody go to church with us on the weekends, at least until, after they turned 16 or some arbitrary number that, I had picked. And I think in part because of the chaos of having so many people in the house, and in part because it was the way I was raised, we followed a very formulaic way to be in the house.
Mhm.
And honestly, I'm gonna start crying. As Katie recalls feeling apart from the family, I did not realize that at the time. If she secluded herself in the living room or felt left out in that way, I was following a plan.
Right.
I don't think we were harsh disciplinarians. We didn't use a belt or anything like that. We did spank that, at that time, again, 30 years ago or so. And you were told to do something, you were expected to do it, and, on and on. It just in that way, it was just the way things were. And I'm not happy that Katie struggled. What I am absolutely so touched by is what I have learned and developed through her process of recovery. I'm very, very grateful for the depth that I have found in that process.
I like the funny stories.
I think
No,
I
the
know, but
funny stories about like when you first heard me laugh.
Oh, well, that wasn't the question I was asked.
But kind of, it's like when my
But it does
personality
go to
started coming
personality.
out.
So it is true. It does go to personality. Katie was, as a newborn, so she's number two. The first one was very easygoing, very, we thought we were the best parents ever. And then along came Katie just 14 months later, who didn't sleep through the night, who was, very unhappy, very demanding, very trying, all of those things. And what the story that Katie is recalling is that she was probably about 6 weeks old, and I was just literally at wit's end. I could not comfort her. I couldn't get anything. So I had her above my head and didn't shake her, but I'm like,
Right.
What do you want from me? She laughed. Literally, she laughed. And that is the first time she does recall the story correctly. And I should have had the forethought at that time. Oh boy, are we in for a ride here? And I did. I was just so overjoyed that I got a happy emotion from her that I didn't even think about what that meant about her personality. But yes, in retrospect, that was a clue that I missed.
So basic. Well, first of all, I commend you for continuing to have the kids, because my mom stopped after one, and she was like, I just don't think we can do this again. So, kudos for you. But I think it's. I mean, obviously, we can look at hindsight, but is that kind of just for clarity's sake? Are you saying that you're going, I was so frustrated and angry and was like, what do you want from me? And that's when she started laughing. And that's kind of just how it has always been, where it's like people get frustrated and she just sits back and laughs. That sounds about right. That tracks.
That's what Taylor says. Yeah. But I don't mean to be that way.
Yeah, I think that she's not afraid of big emotions, actually, at least now. I mean, I wonder if that was the case then, and then just the way we raised, because part of our German and heritage is to repress all of that, and you just do what you got to do, and you ignore bad feelings. And I think Katie, my perception now, obviously she can speak for herself, is that she was experiencing, she didn't get that part of the genetics. And so repressing those big feelings, I clearly think harmed her. And I just, since I wasn't acknowledging big feelings at the time, I could hardly notice them in my young daughter at the time.
I think looking back on that situation with sort of the information that I have now, just about ADHD and sensory seeking, we think of sensory seeking. I worked with kids in the facility after getting clean, and we think of sensory seeking as, oh, they want to put their hands in sand and feel that, but it can also be wanting to spin around and run around, and so possibly,
thrill seeking.
Just the sensation of being up there and seeing, I don't know, but the airplane thing,
Yeah.
that's also a sensory experience for kids, and that's why they enjoy it. So yeah, I don't know. But I do hear in, a lot of people's recovery stories, oh, they knew when they were an addict at such and such point. I don't remember struggling with food or sneaking treats or being anything like that. But I do think just the part of, I would say mental illness, but Mom, you and Dad always said that my perception was skewed. And I think that's probably a accurate read on, the feelings that I was feeling as a child, just kind of really negative and apart from, and the like attempts at connecting and love like weren't quite hitting. So it was like I wasn't receiving what you guys were, attempting to,
Our formula.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We weren't prescribing to this is what you do, this is how you live, and I grew up in a very kind of similar way where my mom was like, this is how you behave. This is like when you go to school, this is our prescription of life,
Oh, I
right?
remember another example, perfect example of like with the church on the weekends. I always had bloody knees because those damn tights. You would bloody your knee, and then you would have to wear tights on the weekend, and your scab. Then when you go to pee, you had to pull your tights down. You pull your scab off, and I feel like I still have scars from. But I don't remember complaining about having to wear tights. But I do remember, being in the stall at the Shoney's or whatever, just like, goodness gracious,
Just to clarify for listeners, those
Yes.
weren't bloody knees that either the church or your parents imposed
I
upon you.
think the bite.
Thank you for
probably the
clarity.
bite turned right, that bite up that
I
darn
just wanted to
hill.
make sure.
Not from like having to kneel on rice or something. No.
Yeah, no, just your active lifestyle.
Right.
Yeah, I remember climbing trees. Yeah, riding bikes. I think all three of us were outside a lot.
Katie was a star soccer player. She ran a record-breaking, was it an 800 in middle school on a stress fractured shin that we didn't know about until she had been complaining that her leg hurt, but wanted to run the championship race there, and she did and won it. And then we had the x-ray and she had a stress fracture.
Yeah.
So I mean, she is, she was and is just a phenomenal.
But there was that thing in first grade. See, I'm going to bring up all the stories. There was that thing in, what was the first grade teacher?
Miss Neeson was her name. And we had a great deal of difficulty with back talk from Katie, which again, didn't fit the formula, right? No matter
but it tracks. Yeah.
No matter what was said or imposed. And this too is a clue. It struck me and I've carried it with me, but I didn't understand. It would have been enough actually had I been attuned to, the things now that I have a better understanding of. But at the conclusion of the parent-teacher conference, at which Katie was not present, I said, and of course everything was very complimentary. Katie was an excellent student and did everything she's supposed to at school, just not at home. But I said, Miss Neeson, I would like to ask a question. Do you have difficulty with back talk from Katie in school? And Miss Neeson paused and then said, Katie has a very strong inner sense of justice. Mm. And that, now, Jen, you're nodding. Absolutely. Yeah. That's my Katie, right? And that is for everything that I was calling back talk. I do think it's motivated from that really deep within, with her seeking and searching for justice for all. At the time, it didn't solve my problems at the dinner table. And again, I stored that away. But
it is an interesting little insight about how just one little change in perspective can kind of alter your view on the person that's like right in front of you, right? Where you're like, oh, that makes a little bit more sense. And I, like, cause I haven't obviously known Katie for as long as you have, but I will say that she will defend her friends and the people that she cares about, like, and if she sees something that's just she feels like is just not right, that's where I see when she gets that, like, fire, and she starts just absolutely she's like, I gotta make this right," and sometimes that can come off a little aggressive. But it's from, like, the best place
It
in
is.
her heart, right? So some of those, like, just that little bit of change in perspective can really change the way that we see a person, right? And I wanna kind of fast forward a little bit here and go into and ask Katie, so obviously there eventually drugs started to come into the picture. When would you say that you had your first maybe inclination that there was an issue?
So I actually, okay, so let's just say this. Okay, in fifth grade, I remember a little boy down the street, he approached me and was like, "Hey, I talked to a girl who went to your school and I asked her who was popular and she said you were." And I like that is burned in my brain because I think all of a sudden I became aware that I was being perceived and that there was something called popular that I needed to know about and needed to concern myself with. Then I remember entering middle school where like clothing changed. All of a sudden we were like shopping at Limited too. And I had been a tomboy and so was just really struggling with like, I feel like all of a sudden, I don't know, I had to dress different or something. And but drinking was cool. I feel like among my friends. Now looking back, I realized I had some friends who had some really deep seated issues at home with they were like um doing the self-harm and but being their friends, like I didn't understand what was going on. And yeah, I think at that point I thought we were just like exploring and having fun and didn't realize that it was something that I was gonna have a problem with.
Right. Well, and that's kind of why I like to ask that question of like when is the first time you notice there's a problem, because there's like a difference between like the normal, like what kind of normal kids go through. They're like drinking, they're experimenting. And I think by and large, like 80% of the population experiences that, right? Where it's like, I'm just in my young thing, like days, and I'm discovering alcohol or I'm discovering some other
Mm.
things. And then it's like at some point though, it turns. Right.
I
And
don't think it
so
turned for me personally until way later.
yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
but I was blacking out, you know, I was doing things were happening that, you know, the um yeah, like getting molested and things. And but that was like I didn't even understand those things as I understand them today. So it wasn't until like I mean, I really don't think I recognize the memory that I have in my brain is just of me when I was in high school years later, being when I decided, when I found a more reliable connection for OC80s and like sort of was like laying in my bed being like, I don't know if I should do this every day, but it makes me feel better. I'm going to kind of thing and like taking that road. And that's at the point that I remember making a choice to, you see what I'm saying?
Right.
And that was years later, you know?
Yeah. Mhm. And so that was kind of the point, and I guess, follow-up question, because you said there were a lot of times in which, like, you were blacking out and things were happening to you in these blackouts. So in your mind, though, what was going on in your mind in those instances to kinda shrug that off and make that, like, a normalized thing for you?
Well, that was still in middle school. So there
Right.
was not this understanding. That's what I thought drinking was.
Right. So you were just like, so this is just what happens when you drink.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Totally normal in middle school, right?
Right.
Because like that's what everybody in middle schools doing.
Well, in my mind, everybody, I mean, it was my friends, and even of my friends, I wonder how many were actually blacking out. But to me, that was my experience. So,
that's what everybody's doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, Barb, now you're hearing this, right? And I don't know what you guys have talked about and what you guys have not. But she's in middle school. What's your perspective on what was happening in her world at that time?
So just for the record, that was new information for me. But moving on from there, the Katie continued to be an excellent student. We
the battle of the books.
Battled the books, yeah, all of that, soccer, track, all that I've said before. Two things: she was in many respects very mature. Continued with the theme of that strong inner sense of justice, which caused difficulty with teaching staff, both in the middle school and high school levels, for sure. And it was of note to me, I don't remember what class it was or who the teacher was, but she came home from middle school having gotten out of one of her assigned classes and put in a different one. Do you remember that, Kate? And anyway, they'd never contacted me. Katie did this all on her own, which my internal response was, how can the middle school do this? The second thing so all of that was happening. Then the second story is that for the first time, and Katie's going to laugh here maybe, but Katie didn't, I don't know, she got her first grade card with maybe 2 B's on it or something like that. I don't even remember now what the problem was. I was very concerned because of what we had seen that was different. Now, I do remember one, I realized that drinking, because we had found empty evidence of drinking. I don't remember if it was cans or a bottle of wine or something in our bonus room upstairs. So I knew that, okay, we're in that era, So with that, what I viewed as a decline in her grades, I came up with a contract that she had to sign. It's still in the house. I still run into it occasionally.
Yes.
I love this.
That it wasn't, it was her promise that this was not an indication of her losing interest in her schoolwork, and she was going to reapply herself and all this other kind of stuff, So what I am also now aware, consistent with Katie's own awareness about brand names and things like that, which we've never been. I mean, she described herself as a tomboy. I call us the Beverly Hillbillies. We live in a fairly, a suburban area, and we've got a tractor in the backyard, which, don't tell anybody, it's not supposed to be there. And it just, you can't get a car in our garage and that kind of stuff. So no, we didn't do much by brand names. I remember one Christmas, she wanted a pair of, is it Sevens
for All Mankind?
There you go. Jeans for
obsessed.
Christmas. And she wanted them so bad. That's not our Christmas budget, so that is what she got, was that one pair of jeans for Christmas. But I saw at the time this was going on, then I saw that increased awareness. And in fairness, part of our formula was, what will the neighbors think? That is how we were raised. And it didn't have that effect on me as a child because our neighbors didn't have brand names. But I can see now in retrospect, if our speech and actions are act right when you're in public, because you got to be careful what the neighbors think, how that could, on a developing child, turn into, I got to dress the right way, and her comrades were of higher financial, it just was we were school group.
Did you cut out, or did I cut out?
No, just for a second.
Oh, okay,
it's okay.
So that message is not to me. Okay. So it's all interesting the way it all comes together, because we were seeing that this was, developing, I guess. And it was sometime maybe within the next 2 years of there, Katie, that we started seeking counseling.
So real quick, just on the brand names. Yes, when we moved to the fancy neighborhood, I call it, I remember being on the bus and they made fun of me for not having brand shoes. And I was like, what is a brand name? Like, I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't know generic and brand name. I think I was in like 3rd grade when we moved, but, and we were very, and then like, yeah, I guess I didn't realize that boys bully you when they like you. So I thought like everyone hated me, but, yes. So I believe it was the summer of after 8th grade when you found beer cans under my bed and I was sent to counseling. So it would have been like right before high school. Yeah. And then I think the perfectionism started cropping up around that time, just with like cross country and like, or the pressure. Cause I remember, we talk about dad, whenever dad would be like, how was your run? And I'd be like, stop pressuring me. Cause I thought if whatever I would tell him wouldn't be good enough. Like if I told him, oh, I only ran to Kildare Farm or whatever, which is, I don't know how far that is, but in my brain, he wasn't going to think that was far enough.
So, Barb, you found these empty beer cans. She's in 8th grade, right before summer of 8th grade, right before getting into high school, right? And you found these empty beer cans. What went through your mind when you found the beer cans?
Um, the initial reaction, again, going to my formula, was how disrespectful. Honestly, that's the first. How dare that happen in my house?
That's so funny. That's my immediate response to things too.
Because we were so afraid of our parents, and they weren't, by all, we weren't beaten to an inappropriate degree either, but that was the relationship. And that was both Kate's dad and my initial response was how disrespectful, and so that's where the punishment thought comes in. Now, before we reacted to Katie in that way, we talked about it, thought about it. We assumed it was exploration. I had no idea that Katie had started drinking so much earlier and, was drinking to blackouts even prior to that time. We were aware that kids were going through open garages and taking alcohol out of other neighbors' open garages at the time. And she had a particular friend that perhaps when I questioned Katie and her older sister, by the way, we didn't know this to be Katie. You got to remember, we've got the other kids in the house too. And when I questioned them, I think this friend's name came up. So as the perpetrator who had brought the alcohol in from having stole it from a neighbor's garage. And I don't remember what agreement we reached, but we actually sat down, included that friend in our discussion with Kelly and Katie, and we thought we were being very progressive at the time and dealt with it as they were exploring something. We didn't care for it. We didn't care for it happening in our house. There likely was some type of goodness, it's been so long since I've punished somebody. What when you're put on restriction, what is that?
Grounding.
Grounding. Yeah, we likely grounded. But I still didn't have any notice toward a problem at that point.
Yeah. Of course not. One, she's in 8th grade. She's a great student, right? She's got all of these other things.
Correct.
Going
and
on
she'd signed the contract.
She's smart. She signed the contract. Yeah. I mean, who would ever go against the contract?
Exactly.
Right. So I'm gonna fast forward, at least especially for time's sake, in getting into when the problem started becoming a problem. And you had kind of hinted at, Katie, when you were a few years later, you started noticing that there was a problem from the time that you were kind of like, I noticed that there's like maybe a little bit of an issue here, but it makes me feel good, so I'm going to keep doing it anyway. To the point in which you were kind of way further down the road. How long was that?
I got kicked off the cross country team for drinking during practice. I was a varsity cross country runner. I can't remember if I was All-American, but I know like my running mate definitely was. and that's who I kept up with at races. And yeah, and looking back, it's kind of funny because I've always blamed the girl. We had gotten alcohol for the weekend through our older friends, and it was at her house, and she lived right near the school. And so we ran over there and just took one shot, and she came back to practice and acted drunk, and we ended up getting kicked off the team. But yeah, so I think I started getting in trouble. So that happened. And then the travel soccer team that I was on, they heard about it, and they wanted to kick me off the team too, or set me on the bench or something. And then I totaled my car.
So,
But things started happening pretty quickly.
so things went downhill pretty fast at some point. And Barb, when things kind of started going downhill, what was your first like moment where you could see things going a little not according to your plan? And you're like, okay, maybe there's a little bit more of an issue here.
I don't remember probably the first time. What my first memory though is that things were, although I can't define it in more specifically, the relationship had degraded. I was uncertain as to what Katie was doing. I have some exposure to the topic outside of my family. And I was a growing sense of this cannot be good, right? And we didn't talk. She did not share. Counseling, by the way, did not go well. We tried different counseling. Things were a mess, and I knew that much. One morning before it was still dark, before my alarm went off, Katie got into bed with her dad, and I got in on my side of the bed, and my eyes opened. She never said a word. And that, I knew something was up. Both something is wrong, and oh dear God, she still comes to me. I mean, so even though she couldn't articulate it, that gave me hope. I mean, I had no clue the measure of what we were dealing with. And in fact, so my alarm went off. She got up and left. Phone rang about 11 o'clock that morning. It was the president or the principal of the high school saying that he hoped Katie had told me why he was calling. And because she'd gotten into bed with me that morning, I was able to say with all honesty, I'm aware there's an issue, because, that was the beginning. That would be my bookmark of where things began. I was out of town when she totaled the car. And by that point in time, when her dad called and said, Katie's been in a wreck, I'm going there now. He called me back after the fact, still from the scene, and said, I think Katie's got a head injury. I'm going to take her to the emergency room. And I said, what do you mean you think she's got a head injury? And he said, well, she keeps falling asleep. I said, Kevin, you need to go get a drug test now and test her, because that's not what a head, with everything else I had, she needs to be tested. And he said, I can't test my own daughter. I mean, it was a foreign. Oh yeah. And he did not. So I had a lecture to give the next morning at 8. He did take you to the emergency room. I am so grateful that I don't know. It goes both ways. I was glad at the time that they did not test you there, because it kept it in-house, I gave my lecture first thing in the morning, hit the road, stopped at CVS on my way, bought a test, and it was positive when I got home. However,
it was positive for
benzos.
It was positive for a few things, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Benzo is what comes to mind. But yeah, that was just the beginning of what came to be 15 years.
So we have 15 years and of probably some chaos. So I'll just ask Katie, in that time period of that 15 years from that point on, what was like one of the things that stuck out to you the most?
That I had to get good grades and do my school.
Yeah. Well, so let's go into like maybe your mid 20s. Now we're going to fast forward a little bit and go into
Okay,
your.
so by my mid-20s, I had gotten my college degree. I had double majored. And I was trying to navigate what comes next. I was struggling to keep a job. But I was checking myself on outward success, right? So when I became a paralegal and was doing that and got into law school, got a scholarship, like I thought I was doing okay.
Right.
While using.
Yes.
While using, which is always just really impressive one for me, because that was not, I always had an external thing for myself where like I was just a failure because I failed at everything, but usually by choice because I didn't want to try to succeed. So you couldn't hide as well in my shoes. But I always think it's really impressive when someone can externally be so successful. And you say that externally successful, but what was going on internally for you?
I think I probably tried my best to not be aware, which is, yeah, I looking back, it's like I had gone to counseling and they gave me meds and they didn't work. And so I found my own solution.
Right. So you were kind of just like things are really good. When would you say later on in life did things start turning again and get really bad?
Well, I think they were always kind of teetering, right? It
Mhm.
was like always one crisis to the next. But I thought if I just kept like the school or whatever in order, then things would pan out. But yeah, then close to my last year in law school, or maybe it was exam time ish, and of my second year of law school, and I had gotten in trouble for plagiarism, just where I had turned in a rough draft of something that was so rough, like there weren't correct citations because I hadn't been able to put the time into it. And so that started, so basically I got in trouble, and that sort of started, there was like this big conversation I had to go in front of a panel, and was forced to take a semester off, but I wasn't able to recognize I wasn't ready to quit, basically.
Right.
And so things just kept getting worse, until I had that moment of, yeah, I think, because I had always said that I would rather die than go to rehab. And I don't know, I guess I thought of it as quitting, and I didn't want to be a quitter, so to speak. I mean, people in recovery are familiar with that sort of mindset. But then like one day I had a change of heart and was like, oh, like rehab isn't where you get punished and sent to, like it's where you can go if you want to change your life and get some tools. And I had just finally arrived at that place.
Right. And Barb, so she's externally, she's doing well in school and stuff. And when did you notice that there was like a deeper issue going on? Were there like signs? Did you know something was going on, but maybe you didn't know what you were looking at? What was that like for you?
So it depends. So
Mhm.
Katie used, and we were aware of consistent use, although she did several times try other modalities than illegal drugs, prescribed by the
Mhm.
doctors and that type of thing. Um, but as she noted, it was from crises to crises. So
Mhm.
educationally, she did fantastic. Again, everything was great, but at the same time, um, money was always an issue. That is to say, she would ask for money that I wouldn't question it the first time, but then by the time we're to the sixth request in 45 days or that kind of thing,
Mhm.
so that was always outstanding, and was an area of discomfort. Um, the calls I would get, I still, little small trigger for me is if my phone rings after 9:30 at night, because there was a
Mhm.
time in there when that person would always be Katie. and in an unhealthy frame of mind. I mean, literally either ranting about something that her partner at the time said or failed to do, or, that was very stressful for me. I'm not at all comparing to the stress that she herself was going through, but that's just my little experience. Ultimately, we had stopped all monetary assistance, but for an apartment that we got her in the hopes that she would be able to finish law school, still not understanding. We went back to a contract. She had a contract. She was going to go, do all these things. And when that lease ended, Dad literally moved her out of that apartment, as we had told her for a year would happen. He called me on the way back from that area, literally ball. I mean, he was torn up. It was the hardest thing, in his work, that he'd ever had to do. And we didn't know what was going to happen. Katie called literally within 30 days, right at the 30-day mark, and asked for help. And we had tried to force help on when we found it. When she wrecked that car, we took her into an IOP outpatient program, and
they didn't test for fentanyl back then.
Well, back then fentanyl wasn't hugely on the market as it is now.
I had access to it.
Yeah.
So, and then from there, the story, has been all uphill, both in terms of the work that Katie has put in and the outcome. And I know we're getting short on time, and I just want to take the opportunity to say, and here I'm going to start crying again, I could not be, and this is not to put pressure on Katie, do not misinterpret this as pressure for the rest of your life. I could not be more proud of Katie living authentically, truly, that person that had so long tried to get out. And because of, the formula we lived, right? She struggled with that. And I am full of joy every single day when I reflect on who Katie is and the life she is living now. It's just incredible to me. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that. And Katie, you called your mom and dad and asked for help, and you went into treatment. And what was that experience like for you when you went in there?
So I was in Atlanta, right? And my mom came down and got me. And I remember being excited. Like, I think I remember being excited. I remember having these plans of starting a ukulele band, all these things, right? But I do remember, and I liked the detox that I was sent to, and I was originally excited to go to, it was described as like, or I thought it was going to be like a hippie place where I could take the ukulele, and do art or whatever. But it ended up being a lot more strict than the detox that I was at. And actually, at the detox, I got in trouble several times. One, for not wearing a bra, and somebody complained about being able to see my nipples. People are always complaining about me, Jen. One, that I was singing too loud in the shower. Anyway, but I do remember, being a little thrown off by, they took all my clothes. I wasn't allowed to wear shorts because they were too short. It was an all-girls treatment center. I wasn't allowed to have sugar. I wasn't allowed to, I could call my parents once every 2 weeks, and the therapist would talk to us. I was like, this place is way too expensive. I can just go to meetings. Because I, in my heart, knew that I was done. And I was convinced that, I just needed to get a sponsor. They wouldn't allow me to get a sponsor. And so the biggest issue that I remember having at the treatment center was that it cost too much, and that I didn't go to enough meetings, and I couldn't get a sponsor. What do you remember, Mom? Oh, and they wouldn't let me do my law school stuff. So I ended up having to, because originally the treatment center that I was going to go to was one that would let me finish out. But I mean, maybe that was good. I really had time to focus on myself, get a therapist that I actually was honest with and could talk to. yeah, I think that was maybe the first time that I was really still enough to be like, what might be going on with Katie, you know? And we did end up having some art therapy there where I really got in touch with my creativity, which I continued after getting out of treatment to this day. So yeah, there was a lot of good things that came out of that treatment center, but you know, as per my MO, like I definitely thought I had a plan and thought that I knew what was best.
Well, of course. And so, Barb, what was your experience with her going through that treatment?
I don't remember. Isn't that funny? That's the most recent end of it. I am stuck on just the things we've talked about here in this gathering this afternoon, on the fact that going back to the principal calling me in and sitting down with him, I can hear myself telling him she was suspended there in high school for drinking during the cross country practice for 10 days, I think it was. It was a pretty long suspension. And I pointed out to him at the time that my perception of Katie is this would not bother her in the least. This would be a notch in her belt. And in hearing Kate, I do think that that's true. It was something to hold up. She was proud of it, I think, in some respect. But in listening to Katie tell her story today, I would encourage those involved with youth to take that second breath and consider whether, for someone struggling, whether kicking them off their outlet, the cross country team, the soccer team, it is the way I was raised. Those were all rewards for doing what's right. But I think when we're talking about the mental health and strength of individuals, that to completely remove their place of affirmation had to have itself had a significant impact on Katie, and I presume others as well. So that's kind of where my mind was. But obviously, we're very, very thankful. I mean, beyond words, right? That Katie had the strength to get through it, that the timing finally worked, that she did find and make a relationship with a counselor that had made great inroads and assisted Katie. But I do not pretend that it is not a substantial part due to Katie's own strength.
Yeah. Absolutely. Because it comes from us. And then one of my follow-up questions to that is because you talked about, going in and out of counseling at a younger time and it not going well. So Katie, you finally found this counselor that made an impact on your life that really helped you. What was the difference between this counselor versus all the other times that you had tried to go
Well,
to
I think
counseling?
she was the most expensive one that I'd ever had, I think.
Okay, but minus the money.
No, well, it's just funny
Right,
because
but
Mom, you always have said that I have expensive taste.
Yep.
So okay, so we could look for the expensive counselors. Okay.
Well, obviously I was ready to talk to somebody. I was in, and yeah, I don't know what the reasoning was, but I respected her, and yeah, I don't know why if it was just that I was a kid back then and I just didn't feel like they could ever possibly understand what I was going through. But yeah, I don't know. And
Well, I think you said right, and I think you said something really important was that you were ready to talk to someone.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that you found someone in that space that you connected and respected in that time to be able to talk to them. Right.
Yeah.
So, but at the end of the day, you were ready.
Yeah.
So, and so, fast forward a little bit, you get out of rehab and you start going and trying to figure out how to live this new way of living, right? Trying to figure out how to be clean, sober, whatever you want to call it. And what has in the last, because I'm gonna just go ahead and tell for the audience and for time's sake, you have 5 years, which
Yes.
is huge.
Thank you. Yeah,
Amazing.
it's incredible.
It is incredible. And just a little side note, just because I feel like your 5 years has not been very um
Smooth sailing.
smooth selling. It has not been smooth selling. And we don't have to go into too many details, but I'll just give you an example. Your 5 year celebration came on October 8th, 10th. Is it the
Well, it
10th?
was scheduled to be on the 2nd or something, and that
Second.
was right after Hurricane
Oh,
Helene.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm okay. Thank you for the
My
date.
clean date was the
I
day
was like,
before the hurricane.
so your clean date was the day before Hurricane Helene came in. So this tells you when we were recording this podcast is just towards the end of October. We're just now starting to get back because we were supposed to have this podcast recorded like 3 weeks ago, but
Yeah.
we had to postpone it due to Hurricane Helene. And but I almost kind of feel like that's kind of how your recovery has gone.
I mean, in the beginning there was some issues just with recovery houses and things, but yeah,
Singing too loud in the shower, that kind of thing.
exactly.
Okay, but she
She's
is a
going
good
to the meeting
singer,
too
so
early.
so we
Right,
can't give
true.
her
We
too
did.
much stuff about that.
Right.
They just
So,
didn't recognize the talent.
right. I mean, you can't force them, Anyway, everybody's got to come to their own conclusions. But yeah, I had I don't know the PC terminology, I guess, but I ended up in a relationship where we were both in recovery. He relapsed and hit it, and I knew something was up, but I wasn't quite sure what it was, and we kept doing this back and forth thing. And now, I guess we would call that sort of psychologically abusive. And I mean, I'm obviously in recovery and probably not the most healthy person to be in a relationship with anyway, but it ended up with, him kidnapping me, a whole ordeal. And he's now in prison for 6 years. So, and I don't have contact with him, and I don't think that he's the love of my life. So that's some growth, right?
We got some growth there.
We
And
got some growth. Yeah.
right. And the reason I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about recovery and it not always being smooth sailing is because recovery for a lot of people, it's not smooth sailing. There's a lot that happens. Life still shows up.
Right.
And sometimes we don't always have the tools or the skills. We heal over time, but it doesn't happen from day one, right? We still
Right.
have a lot that we carry with us into recovery. We have a lot of things, wounds that we fix because it goes so much beyond the drugs. And I think
Right.
that for so many people out there, parents, family members, or other people that just don't know, they think that as soon as you put the drugs down, then your life is just supposed to go uphill and everything's supposed to be really great. But it's like this is so much beyond just the drugs. But because life can be so chaotic, even like when we're clean and we're healing and all of that stuff, I like to remind people that we can get through these things and still
Right.
remain clean on the after. I think it's incredible what you've been through in your recovery and actually stayed clean, because there's a whole lot of people that have gone through a whole lot less that use that as an excuse.
Right.
And, I'll talk to parents because that's kind of what I do for a living. And they're like, well, we don't want to like rock the boat, or we don't want them to feel like they kind of still want to walk on eggshells, or they're like, oh, well, we're worried that like this person is going to make them use. And I was like, listen, let me tell you something. It's up to us on whether or not we decide we can get through things, and we have to learn how to get through things, hard things. And and come out the other side clean. Cause this is, we have to face our triggers. We can't walk on eggshells. We have to learn how to live our lives, and life shows up. So, Barb, I want to kind of throw that to you. Is you've seen Katie go through some things during her recovery that she has stayed clean through, but what's been your experience watching her go through some of
So
these tough things?
that, and then tying also back to something else you said, when Katie first finished recovery, I will be very honest. I expected.
Wait, when I did what?
When you finished recovery?
Rehab.
Rehab.
Oh,
Sorry.
I was like, wait,
Rehab.
what? Mom, you don't
You're
understand.
done with recovery. Like,
I'm sorry.
Katie,
I'm sorry.
you
Yeah,
have
I
recovered.
did. That was my ignorance. Right.
Right.
When she finished rehab, when she got out of rehab,
Uh-huh.
I thought she would become the Katie that we had expected her to be.
Hmm.
Right. That she would become more mainstream. That whole formula thing that I'm talking
Right.
about.
No
Right.
way. You guys are in for a surprise.
So after about the first year of recovery, and her language didn't change, and she got a number of tattoos that are, visible here, even on this, on particularly on her left hand, and those types of things. And my first thought was, okay, when is she going to be like me?
She's going to fit into the mold that I feel like I wanted her to fit into when she put the drugs
Correct.
down.
That's correct.
Right.
And that is where I started this by saying, so I go back to the beginning of this. That is when my depth grew, because she showed me she wasn't that mold, right? She didn't fit in that mold, was never a part of that mold. But Mom, I am a terrific, wonderful person with great things. And as I said, I have learned so much in watching Katie, as well as experiencing Katie, because she is an experiential thing to behold. That I am so glad that she stayed authentic, that she figured out or began expressing who she is, so that now I have a relationship with Katie as she wants to be, and I think is called to be. And that has the enrichment is priceless. I mean, literally.
What I tell some people is it's such an amazing thing to watch your kids grow up. It's an even better thing to watch your parents grow up. And I think through this, because I think my mom has had a very similar experience as well of going, this helped her really get, I think, in touch with herself and start understanding maybe some of the belief systems that we have around the kids and what we think they should be when especially like for someone that's like, I'm just me and I'm just trying to figure out and I just want to be me, right? And Katie's like, I just want to be me. So, instead of her fitting into, your mold, instead you got the best version of your daughter, which is just her. And that may be the person that decides one day that she's just gonna like shave her head off, or like cut off all her hair, or just add more interesting tattoos to her body. And we love that. We love watching people grow into themselves and who they are really meant to be.
Or try to launch another business venture.
Exactly.
All at the same time.
Right.
I know.
Okay.
What I know and feel is that when I am with Katie now, just even the vibe in the room is so much. I believe that she has accepted who she is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the stress where there used to be stress feels so much different now. It just, yeah, it's palpable.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is one of, I guess, one of my final questions, and I'll ask each of you separately. But for Katie, what would you say to maybe some of the parents or the family members that are out there listening to this right now? What would be like a piece of advice you would give them?
Oh my gosh, that's so huge. Well, I mean, yeah, without knowing where some listeners might be coming from, I mean, what I wanted to say, and I know we're running out of time, was just the cool things that me and my mom have gotten to do together since, I guess, her wanting to be a part of my life as I am, like with her coming to Pride and doing the tent with me.
Yes.
And you know what I mean? And I do think I probably did go to law school in an effort to understand her better, to want to be like her. Um, you know, and so I just, yeah, appreciate being able to like share with her in something where I'm allowed to be myself, I guess. And so I don't know what advice somebody can take from that, but the joy that I've experienced is, you know,
Right. Maybe something along the lines of allow them to figure out who they are and be a part of who they are, not who you
right,
necessarily want them to be.
right.
Yeah, something like that. And so, Barb, I'll ask the same question of you. So for my audience, for the families out there listening, what would be the biggest piece of advice you could give someone?
To give grace is the way I would word it.
Mm,
That a lot of perceptions on both my part and Katie's part were wrong. Katie commented earlier that her dad and I told her that her perceptions were wrong. But as you have said, Jen, perceptions are right there, that person's reality.
hmm
And I think that we had been so our perceptions are perceived by the mass to be correct more often than not,
hmm
um, so that we came to believe we owned the perception, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And so my advice would be, number one, if someone has a different perception, that doesn't mean it's wrong.
Right.
It's a different perception. Number two, if you're facing someone who has a different perception, give them grace with it. Don't cast judgment as a result of that.
Mm,
Don't be writing them off or assuming, worst case scenario, assuming that they have, and I think Katie may have experienced part of this, like say referencing her dad asking if she'd had a good run, and Katie believed that was pressure, right? um, to try to get ahead of that, and don't presume that there's an ill intent or
mm,
a controlling intent in whatever's happening, and to pause. Maybe pause is the best thing.
yeah.
Pause and give grace, to allow room for the other story to um, take root and grow, and then you've
Yeah.
got a full tree to work with, and then it's awesome.
Yeah. I'll share with y'all a little story that I have with my mom about that type of perception, because even in recovery with years clean, I still was really challenged when like I found myself like I was working with my mom and I was going through like a really, really difficult emotional time with her. I like a lot of stuff was coming up, a lot of resentments, a lot of anger. And this was with like over a decade clean at this time. And I remember there was this one day where she was um I was mad at her for something and she just looked at me and she's like, "I believe in you."
Oh,
And I found that to be my perception at that time. It was so condescending. I remember I had a water bottle in my hand. It was like a metal water bottle, and I just chucked it in like the side of the building or whatever. I was so mad and I ran away and I was like in tears all because I have my mom yelling at me going, "I believe in you," because it was like that pressure, right? I was like, you don't, obviously, because but it's the perception, like, someone says something and this is where it's like we get to kind of come together, and now that we're beyond that, right, we get to kind of sit and go and have the grace to understand each other's perceptions and be able to talk it through and be able to say, this is what I hear or this is what I understand based on this. And that's how we have been able to heal and grow from our relationship, But the truth is there was nothing that she could have done at the time. Like I had to kind of go off on my own and go figure out, why was I perceiving it in that way? Or why was I seeing that as pressure? Or why was I like misunderstanding? I had to go figure that out. And then I could come back to her and be like, okay, this is what's really going on. And so there's this conversation, and what I like to invite for especially for family members that are in the same situation of what you guys are going through, is have these conversations with one another. Be willing to like be open and vulnerable about the experiences and how you experience each other and what's really going on, and how do you start navigating some of these challenging conversations about when you're a kid and you have your kid perception, and then like when you're a parent, right? Because it's like I had no idea what was happening with my mom and what my mom was going through when I was a kid, and some of the decisions that she made when I perceived them in a certain way, what was going on, because I was a kid. So I didn't have all of the information that the adults do, right? So now that we're adults, we get to sit and have some of those kinds of conversations. And then what I see and I hear from you guys is that y'all are embarking a lot on that journey where, Barb, you get to go and do something really fun, like go to the Pride Festival with your daughter and learn all sorts of new things, which we won't go into now, but we
I
get to
did.
learn. Yeah, we get to see just a whole different side and just embrace it all. And I think it's magical. So is there anything else before we sign off that you guys want to add to this conversation?
Just that I'm so grateful, I guess, that yeah, that you guys didn't give up on me.
Yeah. Yeah. Barb, any last final words?
Nope.
Nope. Good. I think you said a lot. And I just really want to thank you guys both for being willing. It can be really challenging for me to find people that are willing to kind of come on and talk publicly about their experiences, because this is a really challenging topic and it's a very vulnerable topic. So I really want to thank you guys for coming on and being so open and vulnerable today. So
We do appreciate the opportunity.
yeah, yeah.
Each time
Thank
I can learn more about Katie's perspective is a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for listening to this podcast. If you want to listen to more or find more information out about this podcast and more of what I do to help families, you can go check out my page at unbreakable.boundariespodcast.com. It's full of other great podcasts just like this one and other great resources to look through. And please remember to share this podcast with others. You never know who may need to hear this. People are often hiding their battles in this arena, and sharing is a great way to provide this valuable resource to a person you may not even know who needs it. And don't forget, there is always hope, even when things seem the most hopeless.